In here, good afternoon or good morning or good evening, depending on where you are popping in from. My name is Sherrell Dorsey. I'm a contributing editor here at ImpactAlpha, and thank you for joining us for our plug-in discussion. We're having an amazing conversation today with whom everyone likely knows, Taj Eldridge, a leading voice in this social impact investing space, climate tech, across the board. And so we're really in for a great conversation to really talk about what's ahead in 2025. So just letting a couple of folks just pop in here. Thanks so much for joining us on Zoom. We have changed the format just a little bit. I know a lot of you all usually hop into our LinkedIn Live. So it's really great to have you here in the room with us here in Zoom, jumping in. And Taj, how are you doing? Where are you joining us from today?
I am good, Sherelle. How are you? I am calling from Los Angeles. I did not get to make Dirty December as we were talking about prior in the green room. So for all those heading to Nigeria, have fun for me. But looking forward to this conversation. I love it.
Absolutely. It's so great to close out the year and particularly the Plugged In series with this conversation. And I know that you were on an Agents of Impact call just a bit ago with the Impact Alpha team. And so we get to kind of dive in a little bit of kind of your expertise in this space. Obviously, we are preparing for a lot in 2025, a new administration and lots of different conversations on kind of where the future of investments are going to go, especially as it relates to climate. So wanted to end the year ensuring that we have a little bit of direction and big and smart ideas on kind of what to look out for, as well as, what opportunities are going to be ahead for us and those of us who are in this space or looking to, get much more in depth into this space. We have some more folks who are trickling in here. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us and taking the time to spend time with us this afternoon. And if you can, as we are continuing our discussion, feel free to use the chat to drop in where you are tuning in from, and also to ask some questions. There is I believe, a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen as well. So we'll try to get to as many as we can during our conversation today. And if you haven't already, again, make sure you also sign up and subscribe actually to the Impact Alpha subscription service. And I believe there's like a 25% off ordeal. Maybe we can drop that in the chat. If you subscribe today, you'll get access to exclusive articles and all of the incredible data and member calls that Impact Alpha has. So we're going to go ahead and dive into the discussion. And yeah, keep dropping where you are tuning in from. We see New York. Hey, Elijah. Feel free again to LA. We got more LA folks. Amazing.
West Coast, let's do it.
West Coast. I love it. I love it. Well, good morning. This is a great way to start the morning from the West Coast. Okay, so Taj, we're going to jump in here. So you wear many hats, both literally and figuratively. Your hat collection is enviable, to say the least. So we're going to have to get the link of where to go to get really fly hats. But you wear many hats in this space of impact and climate, and you're really plugged in globally, but particularly when we think about Black and Latino and Native communities, Indigenous communities, you're really plugged into this sense in a very expansive way, whether we're talking urban environments or rural environments, and thinking through fund managers and entrepreneurs and innovators, from these communities. And we've written extensively at Impact Alpha about a lot of the work you're doing to really bring the cool and the swag, into the climate space, making it accessible, making it approachable, making it interesting for innovators to really tap into, and also making that economic case for green jobs. And so as we're heading into 2025 and we're operating in this new environment with a lot of uncertainty, we wanted to have this check-in to really see where you're spotting opportunity and risk, what kind of conversations you're having with your colleagues, and any tips that you have to help us navigate this new terrain. So just wanted to give you a warm warm welcome to Plugged In. And thank you again for being here with us today.
No, I appreciate it, Sherrell, and I love the fact you've been having some really great voices on this channel. We're plugged in from Aina, my friend from Virtual Lab, to Bright Ventures, the things that they're doing. So this is really great to be able to have this type of content where we can not only read it from Impact Alpha, but hear directly from these folks who are doing the work in this space. So I love it.
Absolutely, absolutely. There's just so much, there's so much to be said about the extensiveness of what this network and this community has been. And so I think this conversation is just so apropos and a reminder that folks like yourself exist in this space. And so many of us who are looking to both support and find a way to expand this ecosystem, are looking to folks like yourself to really guide the way. And so let's kind of start with one of the hats that you wear, which is backing emerging impact fund managers, particularly through Include Ventures. And so for first time and emerging fund managers, and particularly fund managers of color, we know that there are lots of barriers to raising capital and getting launched. We get those, reports every single year from Crunchbase on, the less than 1%, less than 2%, of funding is going to, to startup founders of color. But with Include Ventures, you've all been really working to speed the growth of emerging impact fund managers within this space to help solve some of the biases that exist within the venture capital world. Can you tell us a little bit about what Include has achieved thus far, and maybe just a little bit more about Include Ventures for those who may not be familiar with the work?
Absolutely. Thank you, Sherrell. And I'm proud of the work that myself and my partner, Bahia Robinson, and the team has done with Include Ventures. Include started out with a project that Bahia actually launched where I was an advisor on, along with Keith Spears, called VC Include. And VC Include has been really instrumental in training a number of different emerging fund managers, being that incubator, for lack of a better word, for emerging fund managers to understand how to build a really better venture fund. And we started out looking at the idea of how do we invest in fund managers like this that bring a different type of idea to this space. And our tagline is the intersection of inclusion, alpha, and sustainability. And when we look at that, for me, what that means is not just race and gender, but it also means geographic diversity and differentiation of ideas. Unfortunately, a lot of times when people think about DEI, when they think about this idea of diversity, they're fixated on the binary measures of gender, of race, and those are important and those are part of it. But when I think about the idea of gender and race, what I think about that is different type of life experiences, different type of value that you're bringing to the opportunity. We're all in a space where innovation is key, and I think that when you start talking about the ideas of innovation, those when you need to have these differentiated new ideas. And that's why I think emerging fund managers make a lot of sense because they're going to come with different type of ideas because they're new to this space. I'm proud of the work we've done over the last 3 years. Impact Alpha has covered some of the things we've done because we've not just done investing. We've created a program where we had GP grants, thanks to the Hewlett Foundation, the Climate Finance Fund with Marilyn Waite, who's been a contributor to Impact Alpha, to funds not just in the US, but in Europe, because we understand that the global impact of climate is global. It's not just, we can't solve it in the United States and think we're done. We can't solve it in Europe and think we're done. We have to solve it from a collaboration standpoint. So that was something that we're really proud of that we did, and hopefully other funds and other institutions will follow along with that because that funding really was instrumental to a number of different funds, such as Melanin Capital out of Germany that focused a lot in Kenya. Melanie Kita doing a really good work there. Nora Bavi with Unconventional Ventures out in the Nordics doing a lot of great work for women in that region, which I think has been phenomenal. And even funds here in the United States that's been really doing some great work. In addition to that, we've made some really great fund investments, over 13 investments in some great funds, such as Azola Ventures, which is a climate-based fund out of Boston, led by Amy Dufour and a couple of others that focus really on the deep tech piece of climate, which I think is needed. And then some really great funds on the West Coast, where I'm located at. So Act One Ventures, really great fund with Alejandro and the team is doing great there. And Wilshire Lane, which is a climate fund, but focused on the built environment. So I think that's going to be a really good, interesting space that we'll see in the future as we start talking about the intersection of climate and investing. And so I'm proud of the work we've done, proud of the work we will continue to do with Include, and I'm proud of the funds we provided capital to and the work that they're doing to invest in other founders.
That's amazing. It looks like there's some VC fellows, some Include VC or
Yeah,
VC Include fellows here as well. Looks like
VCI, put it in the chat for us. Let's do it.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And especially again, just that the expansion and the diversity of both location and the types of investments that you all are helping to support, as well as the ecosystem you are creating for those who are interested in launching funds in the future. I would love to learn a little bit more about, why to focus on emerging managers. I think we kind of automatically assume that there's more opportunity for founders of underrepresented backgrounds to see success when they are raising capital, particularly from fund managers that are from backgrounds that may be of similar. There's at least a level of similarity, but why in particularly is there a focus on diverse and historically underrepresented managers in this space of like clean tech, fintech, health tech, and other impact centered categories that you focus on?
Yeah, I think the thing we have to think about too is at the end of the day, we're still all investors. And I think a lot of times people make the distinction between impact investors and traditional investors. I'll put an air quote. But I truly believe that every investment we make has an impact. And the thing about it is how we measure those things, and we can get into that a little bit later. But I think that for me, when I think about emerging fund managers, again, I think about this idea of being more innovative, who've seen some things out there and say that might not work. We need to try things differently. And if we're talking about climate, I sincerely say, even though, I've been a VC in the space and a fund manager and worked with great organizations such as Lacey, venture capital might not be the only way to really kind of focus on the ideas that we need for moving climate technology forward. There may be needs for other types of funds and other type of capital structures is out there, and I think we need to look into that. But when I think about emerging fund managers, I think about the successes that they're having. I think the fallacy again is that when you're investing in emerging fund managers, they're only looking at certain type of deals or certain type of founders. I think that those funds are looking at anything that makes it opportunistic, and they're looking at things that are undervalued or underrepresented. And we use that word a lot when we're talking about founders in the founder ecosystem. But I think the importance of that is that underrepresented or undervalued, undiscovered, I would say, can yield a lot of great returns. And I look at one of the things early in my career before Lacey, when I was leading an investment fund and an incubator in the University of California, and we were in an area that was outside of California, outside of Riverside, outside of LA, in Riverside, California, and we would invite funds to come and investors to come and founders to come because the region there was cheaper office space, and everything else, so their runway can go a little bit further. But it just made great economic sense. And I think post-pandemic, we're seeing an opportunity to where the need to be in these spaces was about network. It was about getting around people, good ideas. But I'm in Los Angeles, you're in Miami, the people there are in many different places. We're all connected now with this thing called the internet and Zoom and other things that are connecting great ideas and great people. So no longer do we have to be in close proximity. And I think that's really what's bridging the gap for great funds and great emerging managers. I'll shout out one that we haven't invested in, but I'm really proud of them and their LA-based fund, Slauson Ventures, which is on their fund too, focusing on the intersection of small businesses and things of that nature. And technology is focusing there, and also has a climate lens, which I'm proud of. And shout out to Austin Clements and the team there. But that's a perfect example of how it makes sense and how investors are doubling down on great funds with a great thesis. And I think it begins there. It begins in really having a great idea as a fund manager, as your emerging fund manager, on where the missteps are at, where you can make some really great opportunities and returns for investors, and more importantly, the impact. Because again, I think that will go without saying that you're investing in great companies, they're creating great products and on great services, and you have a lens to ensure that everyone gets access to that, or looking at on places where you can have these opportunities there, you're going to get some great returns.
Absolutely, absolutely. I love what Ricardo has to say. He said, I agree, all investors have impact. It all depends on how they measure it. And I think that leads me to the next question where, this is still about creating empowering successful businesses. This is not philanthropy. This isn't, we're doing this because we feel bad and like we're trying to use guilt money to assuage the masses. This really is about, we want to see great companies win. And by winning, we also mean that looks like profit, right? And things that we can, and money that we can use to obviously continue to invest in more companies. So how do the impact investors that you've worked with thus far tend to measure success? I think beyond just, okay, a company has a great exit,
Yeah.
acquisition, or what have you.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it. Well, and I'll start by saying this one thing, and I probably will be in the minority, so forgive me for this. I hate when I see articles that talk about how much a founder has raised or even a fund has raised. I'm less interested in that. What I'm interested in is the customers that company has acquired or that they're working with or the communities that they're impacting. And I think that's where the other part of impact investing comes in and the measurements. Because I think that the capital raised is not something we want to measure. That's not what we're measuring. What we're measuring is the impact. We're measuring the community that that company has built. We're measuring how many, for me, how many jobs have been created. Because I think that you have to look at it from an economic standpoint. When you have job creation, economic opportunities, there's more people to buy a product. You don't want to have the paradox of thrift. And I think that one of the other areas where we're looking at, especially when we're talking about companies that don't have a climate focus, is the environmental impact too. So I think there are different types of areas that impact investors are making those measurements, whether it's economic, whether it's social, whether it's environmental. But I think all of those things are important. And I look back to the pandemic where globally, everything shut down. So it didn't matter how much returns we were providing. It didn't matter how much you raised. What mattered was we had to all attack this problem that was there. And when we were talking about the impact of this particular thing that happened to us. And if we looked at it after that experience with the pandemic, that's when we've seen this upshot into the climate investing. Because I think a lot of us start thinking about if this can happen with this scenario from a health standpoint, what would happen if we have this similar thing on the energy side? And when I look at climate, it is for me the idea of how we utilize our resources. And so I think that when we're talking about the impact returns, we have to think about resource utilization for this as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. I want to transition us a bit here to the overarching economic opportunity when we think about that expansion of the climate tech space. And as you alluded to, the pandemic kind of helped us to sit and look at where are there breaks in our systems. We've also had major events that have happened around water systems. We still think about Flint. We think about Jackson, Mississippi. We think about blackouts that have been occurring over the last, decade or so, and all of these climate related challenges that this space now has the opportunity to really solve for. And we're seeing the uptick in investments in the climate space, which also creates, or by default, is starting to craft industries of opportunity for people to now take on jobs or upskill in order to take on these jobs. And so you've mentioned in prior talks and conversations that green job creation is the thing that's really going to sell this climate transition to the public. And I remember just a few years ago reading The Green Collar Economy by Van Jones when he was in the White House back in the day. And he was alluding to this exact same conversation. You do a great deal of work with Jobs for the Future to really upskill and diversify what you call the climate workforce. And so can you share with us where that work has taken you and what are some of the strategies that you're implementing around messaging in, this green workforce opportunity?
Sure. Thank you so much for that. And I first have to give some congratulations and thank you to Aries, the Charitable Foundation, and Marcel Armstrong, who actually funded this work that I do with JFF. One of the other hats that, as you mentioned, I work on is the idea of workforce. As we were making these investments into these funds and then themselves were making investments into these companies, and we're seeing that those companies scale, one of the things I started to be a concern about was, do we have enough talented and skilled people in this workforce to continue this job? I think there are some folks who might be in the audience or folks who might be listening who might say, "Well, I can't find a job. I'm coming into the industry." Well, we have to look at the idea of not only the job seekers, but people that have experience in other areas that are trying to make job transitions. And so the idea of this building a climate ready workforce was something that was funded by Aries and implemented with Jobs for the Future, where I launched the climate innovations practice there. And it's called CREST, Climate Resilient Employees for Sustainable Tomorrow. And the idea, I think, is that climate, like AI and other things, are considered for us emerging technologies. As we look at the idea of the advancements of artificial intelligence, we look at the advancements of crypto and other digital assets, all of those things are going to require energy. And I think that that's one of the things we have to always think about is that for me, the advancement of those technologies are going to go hand in hand with the need for climate and alternative energy. And I think with JFF, one of the things that we talked about is this idea of how do we really upskill and reskill people out, just not in the coast, but everywhere, going back to the idea of geographic diversity. So we did a few things. Number one, we wrote a number of different papers and research articles around it. And one of our first thesis was the idea that all jobs have the ability to be green jobs. And what we mean by that is, again, going back to the idea of resource utilization and how people can utilize resources differently in a way to make it more effective, cost efficient, and really efficient for the environment. The second piece of that was working with entrepreneurs, both in the climate space, but also in the financial wellness space. Because one of the things we have to also think about is that as we get people into jobs, how we keep people into those jobs, making sure that they have this huge financial wellness piece of that. And then the last piece of that was providing capital to universities such as University of Tennessee and Knoxville and others on helping them think about how can they train and place individuals into these green jobs. And the reason I mentioned Tennessee, Knoxville, we also awarded New Orleans, Greater New Orleans Foundation, Lyra, Colorado, Portland General Electric, the New York New Energy Program with University of Buffalo, the Industrial Commons, also North Carolina, that focus on apparel and furniture manufacturing. These regions got selected because of the diversity of the type of needs that they were seeing, from battery technology to circular economy. I saw somebody put it in there from the circularity piece of it to alternative energy. And some of these states are not considered climate focus ready states. And so one of the things we really talked about too is the language. I think one of the things this election taught us is that narrative and storytelling makes sense. People have heard me say this all the time. Before I was an economist and my graduate degree is in economics, I was a poetry major. So I understand the beauty and the need for language. And perhaps a lot of times too, I think we get caught up too much on that beauty. And for me, it's less about what you call it, but more about what your behavior changes. So I would rather people call it whatever they want to call it, jobs of the future, if they want to do so. But what I want is people to be ready to be able to take care of these jobs that are there. I remember hearing this article in New York Times where a young lady was saying she voted the way she voted because she lost her job at an auto manufacturer and she was blaming electric vehicles. And it popped in my mind is that you can transition the skills you had in this your prior job into these new skills and these new jobs, and that should not be anything that you be afraid of. It actually should be an opportunity to advance your skills. And so I think that's one of the things we've been doing with Crest is really kind of focusing on how do we make it organic for the region? How do we make it relevant for the region, the people that are there? And how do we ensure that the language is important to make sure that people are actually signing up for this? Because remember, for those of us who may remember, we went through this before when a lot of organizations were training people and upskilling people for these jobs. And the unfortunate part about that was as they were training those folks, the jobs didn't materialize. And I think the difference now is that they have people like me who come from the venture capital background, who's in the venture capital community, understanding the type of investments that are going to be important, and working with these workforce development agencies in other areas to ensure that they're training people for the opportunities. Lastly, I would say, Sherrell, too, that we're all going to have to change when it comes to the way we look at training and workforce. And I think the American workers, to be more effective and efficient, they're going to need to have skills on top of skills on top of skills. This idea of lifelong learning, the idea of how can you ensure that you have one type of skill and that skill can be transferable to other areas. And I think those things are going to be important as we talk about the idea of preparing people for jobs of the future, which hopefully for us will be jobs that are focused on climate and sustainability.
Absolutely. So much packed in there. And I think there's a kind of an outweighing responsibility of both investors and founders to really kind of take this space of tech and innovation to really drive this space. And as you mentioned, the language matters, but it also doesn't, because the skills are transferable,
Right.
right? And I think being able to drive that message home is significant. And we know that there's investments that's starting to reach across the country through both the venture side to also a lot of the IRA dollars that are starting to make their ways, CDFIs or community development financial institutions that are starting to prepare for supporting small businesses and green energy amplification and production. But are you seeing that there's activity pretty broadly across the country, or are we still having some of the challenges that we have in venture capital where we're seeing a concentration in certain cities over others or certain states over others? Because I don't think about like, oh, well, what kind of green dollars or investments are happening in, Iowa, right? Or Arkansas. But I just kind of make the assumption that dollars are going to float to where the innovation is happening. But just curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I think, I was going to put it into the chat. There's an initiative from the National Governors Association focusing on skills and skills training and development. And I think one of the things I'm loving, and I talked about the reason I said this initially when we talked about the idea of post-election, that it's an economic issue. And for me, what that's happening is that governors are figuring out, well, we need to have jobs for our constituents, the people who are here. We need to make sure we have this economic development that's developing it, which is why I think that the IRA is going to still be around and still be deployed in some type of manner. And I think there's going to be a really bit of contention there when it comes to the idea of how do we utilize that resource from a public standpoint. I do hope and hope we challenge that some of the other types of private funding from foundations, family offices, and others really come in and spare the gap. But I think also what's going to happen too is that founders are going to be resilient. One of the things that I love about venture capital and being a former founder myself is the resiliency that we have. And I think this goes back to one of the things you and I talked about why emerging managers, why diversity matters. Because I think that when you're talking with a population who has not had a lot of resources, they do an old phrase that we call find a way or make one. And I think those things are going to come into to the play when we start talking about the idea of where to invest in these areas. But one of the things we're seeing a lot more of is this idea of disaster mitigation. We've already seen the floods that have happened in places like North Carolina and Tennessee. We've also seen some of these things that happen in different areas, and I think that you're going to see some type of job opportunities there for people to prepare because there's a lot of losses there. I anticipate a lot of insurance companies to figure out ways to invest. There are some really great insurance companies that have funds like American Family Insurance that has a great fund. They backed a company like Charter Health reducing their risk. And so I think when we see those things that come to the forefront, those are things we're going to see a lot more of. I think also two things we're going to see when we're talking about the idea of where technology and where in this country is going to happen is that I mean, there's going to be a vying for data centers, as we talked about in the very beginning about the push for a lot of these digital assets, a lot of artificial intelligence, and I think there is where you're going to see a lot of the clean built environment and sustainability is going to be happening, where they can have this space to house these opportunities. And so, I think there's a lot of different areas that's going to figure it out. And I think now, even within our focus with Crest, we've had a lot of those different areas from, like I mentioned, from Colorado to the Pacific Northwest to New York to the South that are figuring out ways to whether hone in on the different type of technologies that are needed for their region based upon the impact from an environmental standpoint. So I'm really excited that we have some of these opportunities that are there and some of these governors and everyone is thinking about it. The reason that I think language matters and the storytelling matters is important is because I think that there's this visceral reaction to certain words and certain things that may happen. I think with this administration, there's a lot of uncertainty. Some might even say chaos. But an old quote has said, "Chaos is the ladder," and maybe that ladder can be for some of the investments that are in this space that will figure out ways to make it to where it makes economic sense for the people that's involved.
Absolutely, absolutely. I just want to acknowledge just quickly here, Lorenzo, thanks so much for just mentioning some of the work in Memphis and some of the focus on renewable energy and some of the workforce training programs that are in partnership with University of Memphis, who are also providing training across solar, EV, smart building technology. And then Deborah Rowe has provided some substantial links here to different government-based workforce programs and opportunities. So for those in the room who are looking to tap these particular programs and certification programs to find and locate talent, Deborah has some great resources here. So just wanted to acknowledge the resources that are happening right here in the chat. So thank you so much. And then I know that I'm going to have to let you all go pretty soon here, but I want to be just a little bit selfish. Number one, I want to make sure that we get a little bit more about what brought you to this work. You are so prolific. Every time I text you, you're in another country, on another time zone, speaking across stages on a global scale. But also, we also know that we're entering an administration that's very hostile to this space of climate tech. We know that the energy policy person that's been selected or appointed is very much against even using the term climate change. There may be some opportunities there in geothermal, but the main question we'll start here is just, how can impact investors adapt to this new political environment? In spite of the hostility, especially around both diversity and climate, two major challenges and fights that have been seeing a level of progress, but now looks like they're at risk at being rolled back.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think that for those of us who've been around for a time, we understand that business is cyclical, politics is cyclical, and we boomerang back to this administration that we're in. I think one of the ideas is, do we lean out or lean in? And for me, we need to lean all the way in. I think it's now the time for us to be even more fervent in the type of investments that we want to do, to be even more impactful in what we want to see. I mean, a lot of the things we talked about the value. We've seen some of the reports that talk about the value of investing in women-ran funds, women-led organizations. We've seen the value of focus on emerging managers, emerging managers of color. And now's the time to where we have to separate the wheat from the chaff. But we really, I think, for us, need to show that there is value in diversity. As because I think that when we're seeing these things that have been dismantled every day from different type of organizations that are out there, I think there's an opportunity to show that competition matters. And I think that those companies that are going to be true to the idea of diversity, those companies are going to be true to the idea of sustainability and climate focus. Those companies, my hope is that they will be more competitive than others and show the real value of that. And I think for we would then look at it from a consumer standpoint, we need to support that. And so I think that that's one of the things I want to see more of, is for us to really think about the impact that we're making as investors from an impact standpoint, that we're looking at the impact from not only from a financial piece of it, but from the other areas I mentioned, but just show how this is going to be important for everyone around us. I think also, sadly, what happened with this election was part of it, I think, where people felt like they were unheard. And that goes back to the idea of what does it mean geographic to be diverse, and that's why I mentioned the geographic piece of it as well, and the intersectionality. But I think at the end of the day, we're all our investors. We're looking for these opportunities for innovation, and I think that this is the best time to do so, because we're at this precipice where a lot of the needs are going to be ramped up. We already talked about the ideas with AI and all these other areas, and so there's going to be huge focus, in my opinion, on climate, and a huge focus on really kind of being more innovative in the way that you're looking at, and the thoughts there too.
Absolutely, absolutely. I just want to say shout out to the group chat that's been happening. Folks are sharing resources and dropping their LinkedIn's. It looks like you all are able to connect there. And again, Taj, I want to just get a quick 60-second spiel perhaps on what brings you to this work. Why are you passionate about this space in particular? And then also drop where folks can find you.
Yeah, I definitely want to comment too. And it's funny, Christopher Wilson and hi Debbie Rowe, have been really active in it. And I love what's focusing there. And I think Christopher says it, that this idea of overconsumption and overproducing has been problematic. And I think that that's one thing we have to contend to. And I think that, one of the reasons that we're seeing a lot more focus on the services aspect of it versus the product, but that's a whole nother conversation. But I think for me, I think it's a few things that really kind of drove the work I'm doing. And I think, we've talked about it a lot in the idea of Impact Alpha in various interviews, is that as an economist, we look for the incentives. And if anybody has been down to like a conference like EarthX in my home city of Dallas, Texas, their incentives around climate may be a little bit different than others. And I think that that's why we have to speak to. For me, my work came in climate from two areas. Came from the apparel space when I saw a lot of waste globally, and I think that's one of the things that really impacted me, but also from a health standpoint too. I was impacted by it. And I think I'm not the only one that they're looking at that. There's a talk that's coming this Thursday with heat maps and clean energy culture, focusing a lot more on that as well, talking about these direct impacts that we may see. And so I think that for me, those two things have been one of the reasons why I realized that there are 96 15 minutes in a day. I want to use every one of them dutifully to try to move the work forward. But I also realized I can't do this myself, and why I love the fact that we have this cadre of individuals here focusing on workforce and investment, from my colleague Ananya that's in the chat, would include Ventures, that they're really kind of focused on our work with emerging fund managers, to the work we do around workforce and the work that Debbie and so many others have been doing. And I think that's what we have to continue to remember, that we're not alone. Things like Plugged In are here for us to really come together and learn more from each other and then collaborate. So it would be really great for all these people in this chat to make sure that you're connected on LinkedIn, you're connected via email, so we can push this work forward, because that's the way it's going to happen. And that's the only way it can happen, is for us to be collaborative, and not just in the United States. And I see a lot of people from abroad here as well, from Portugal, from the UK, that this is a global issue. And I'm hoping that we see a lot more of this together as well.
Absolutely. Taj, thank you so much for being here with us. And if you get a chance as well, if you can drop your LinkedIn into the chat so folks can stay connected to follow your work. I always love reading your updates as well on LinkedIn. You share so much of the world and spaces that you're in. And so I get to learn a lot on what conversations are happening globally. So I just highly recommend for our folks here today to just follow Taj in this space. And then also to stay abreast, to stay on top of what's happening in the impact investing space. If you're not already a subscriber here to Impact Alpha, make sure that you make it a priority. You also send the insights to your colleagues, your friends, folks who are either curious about the space or looking to jump into the space. More information, reporting, data, all of that is really helpful. And also Impact Alpha has an amazing job board as well. So for those who are even looking to transition into climate tech in a more formal capacity, that job board is hitting. Let me tell you, it's amazing, especially at the director and executive level. So thank you all for joining us here this afternoon. And Taj, again, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your support and your investment in this space. And thank you to everyone who attended and gave us our time. I believe we will be sharing the recording as well, potentially post discussion. So for those who maybe missed the beginning or towards the end, you will be able to go back and circle back and grab some of these gems that Taj laid down for us. But thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sherrell. Thank you for this as well. To the folks in the audience, let's continue to collaborate and do great work together.
Thanks, everyone.